Welcome to the Graceful Exit podcast. I'm Kimberly Hertz, founder of the Graceful Exit, created to educate, empower, and support women as they navigate divorce. Beginning with us, we are putting a stop to the divorce stigma through meaningful conversations about the emotional and endearing experience divorce often brings. My hope is that you'll follow along on this journey and join our community of women navigating divorce with grace. Hi guys, today we are sitting down and talking to Ivy again, who is our social media manager. Today she's actually going to be a guest on the show, and it's important when going through the divorce, at least when we have children involved, to actually get a perspective of what it's like from a child's lens. And so Ivy has graciously accepted the invitation to share her story and give us a little bit about her history and how she dealt with it from, again, being a child's point of view. And so we'll get started. So do you want to give us a little bit of background about your story, when your parents got divorced, and then how old you are today, and were there siblings involved, and just give us a little bit of background?
So I don't know when the legal part of the divorce officially started. A lot of the issues leading up to the divorce started when I was about, I want to say 8 or 9, which made my brother about 4 to 5. So I did have a sibling. He was younger. He was just starting kindergarten. So for him, he wasn't really aware of what was going on. I was older, and so I did pay attention to what was going on, and I kind of caught on to things. But my parents had split. Like, my dad was out of the house, in and out of the house leading up to the divorce. And so I want to say it was about 2012 when it started legally. And I was about 10 turning 11 that year. So like the peak of the divorce effects on children.
Yeah, and it happened while, gosh, that would have put you like 5th or 6th grade, so junior high, which is
I was, 5th to 6th going into junior high. It finalized in 2014, but honestly, for me, my dad, he was an addict, and so he was in jail for a lot of it, or missing, or doing whatever he was doing. And so I didn't see him like once the divorce happened, really. So for me, it felt like it was a lot earlier than 2014, but legally it did finalize in 2014. And I only know that because I believe FAFSA asks for it. So
interesting. So did you know about the history of your dad growing up, or did you find out fast forward when you're applying to college, or when did you find out about the history of it?
Well, it was both of my parents. At the time, I didn't know exactly what was going on, but as I got older, my mom would mention more and more about what actually happened, and I did figure out what he was into when the divorce started. But it was both of my parents. They both have a history. I believe that they met in NA, so they both have a history of drug abuse and addiction. So when I learned that, it wasn't a surprise to me that he had relapsed. When I was born, they both decided to get clean, but right after my brother was born, I believe that's when he relapsed, and then a few years later is when it got at its peak.
So now looking back, so you're 20 now.
I'm 19. I'll be turning
going
20.
On 20.
Yeah.
What do you feel like was the hardest point during that entire journey as a child? If you could pinpoint a couple times.
I don't know if it was like the uncertainty of what was going on, or because I don't know if it's just me, maybe a lot of kids do this. I have a hard time remembering how I felt at the time. I remember vivid images and memories and like the trauma that I experienced, but I can't pinpoint how I felt except for the moments where my dad was high. They were scary, and I didn't know what was going on. And I love school, and so I'd go to school, and it started to affect my schoolwork. I got my first B ever in the 6th grade, right after my dad, he was high one morning, and the cops had to come and pin him to the ground, and we still had to go to school. So I took my history test, I got my first B, and I think that was when I realized it was finally affecting me, because school was so important to me.
It was your outlet, probably, at times,
Yeah,
right?
easily. And I engaged with a lot of my peers. I was very, very close. I grew up with everyone from kindergarten till we graduated high school. It was like the same group of people.
Friends. Yeah.
And so school was it was my way. I didn't remember anything that I can remember, like what was going on at home. I didn't talk about it. Like no one, I believe adults knew, because there were some of my friends' parents that knew my dad. Some of them were cops, so they knew my dad and they knew me, and it did start to affect friendships, but I wasn't as aware of that until I got older.
So you mentioned a lot about not remembering, and I think it's important to share your story actually that you had just written about, which is PTSD and the reality of it being in your 20s now and suffering from it. A lot of the times with PTSD, we can't remember a lot of the trauma and abuse until we're triggered by it.
Yeah.
So now that you're out of it, it's important to note that you're in college now. You live away from the house, right? You're getting the intense therapy that you need and the counseling that you need. Now that you're out of it, I guess, what are some things that have helped you cope with understanding the entire spectrum of what you lived through as a child?
Well, my therapist, we can't do this right now. I believe it's EMDR. You mentioned that.
Yes.
That's when you stare at a light or something and the therapist will talk to you. My therapist doesn't do that, because it does cost a little bit of money. So I have the free resource at my school right now. So when I can afford that, she really wants me to go and do some EMDR to remember those memories that I blocked out, because I have the emotions now. Talking about it has helped, because I went to therapy earlier this year because of COVID and school and feeling alone, and missing out on this experience that I looked forward to my entire life. But then it turned out to be more about my trauma with my mom post-divorce, and not even as much about the pre-divorce with my dad, which was the crazy part. Is there's trauma from the before it even started until now. There's been this array of different kinds of trauma, probably because of the divorce.
Yeah. So a couple of things I want to mention. EMDR, so that actually is what I have wrote about, and I think it posts today, but I too have suffered with complex PTSD. So the difference between complex PTSD, which is I don't want to diagnose you, but I believe you have, versus PTSD. PTSD is normally just one single event, which a lot of people in war suffer from PTSD, right? It's one, could be a long event, but complex PTSD is having the events happen over and over and over. And with you growing up as a child, it seems as though your entire childhood has been in events of trauma, one way or the other, from your parents being addicts to the unhealthy relationship to the divorce to the relapse, everything in between. So EMDR has helped me significantly deal with my past and trauma and abuse. And to your point, it's either eye stimulation. During COVID, they found different techniques to do, since you're not in the physical office, to do eye movement. You can do it with listening, you can do it with tapping. But what it does is it goes deep into the trauma. So you actually have to relive your trauma, which is so exhausting, but it actually is a way to cleanse your brain, your neurosystem, so that you don't have these triggers anymore. So I do strongly recommend you get that, but I'm so proud of you for reaching out, getting counseling during this time, because not many kids in your situation can understand it and can recognize that they need help.
Yeah.
So I think you spoke a little bit about it, but what got you to the point where you started opening up about your past?
I think it was once I got out of the house, I started to look at my past differently, because I was able to gain some clarity. I lived in the same house my entire life, so the trauma that happened there, even though we remodeled and everything looked different, just being there, I don't know if it was clogging my mind in a way.
So I want to pause there
Yeah.
because so many women have asked me personally, do they think it's better to keep the house in the divorce for stability of the children or a fresh start? And what I'm hearing from you, it was the exact opposite. Had you had physically moved out of your house, it may have been that fresh start that you needed. Am I understanding that?
I mean, I wanted to move out of that house since I was way young. I love houses. I love real estate, and I wanted a bigger house. But I think it could have helped me a lot because there's a lot of weather. Like when I go up to the house, it's not like the images flash back immediately, but I have these weird feelings. Like when COVID hit and I had to move back home, I had a panic attack. Like I was screaming and crying, and I had no idea why I was acting like this, and I think it was my body reacting to that trauma.
It was a trigger to you.
Yeah, the house is. That's why people laugh, but I don't go home for a reason. And that house, it's very small. So, as I got bigger, I got smaller, but it feels even smaller now that there's trauma tied to it, like years and years of trauma. And I don't have a bedroom anymore. My brother moved into my bedroom now, so I also don't really have a safe space because my bedroom was my safe space, especially as I got older and I started to experience some traumatic events with my mother. That became my area of like a den almost.
Yeah. So why, again, you're still so young. How did you know? Is it through the therapy that what you went through was intense or insane in a child? It's not normal, I guess. It can be normal to some situations, but our vision is to try and not have this happen. So at what point did you recognize that it wasn't normal what you lived through? Did you see friends, family? Did you have relatives that had different lives?
So, I mean, all of my relatives, grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone has been divorced. My closest family, my aunt and uncle, so my dad's sister, got divorced at the exact same time. And that was the family that we got together with for all the holidays, like big get-togethers, Disneyland, Catalina, like all these things. So it wasn't just my immediate family that like blew up. It was the extended family. It was all of us, and we still have to deal with that today. So everyone has been divorced, but to be completely honest, when the divorce started to happen and when it just became my mom in the house, she needed to work to provide. It wasn't just her and my dad, it was just her that needed to provide. So she worked a lot. And so she wasn't really around. I was old enough, so she trusted me with schoolwork, and I did well in school, and I did everything myself, basically. Like, I even had to sign for her for some school documents if I knew she was going to be home late and I needed them for the next day or something. And so because of that, I don't feel like that had much influence on me as much as my peers and my friends. I was always with my friends. I had a childhood best friend for at least 10 years, and we were together like every weekend, almost every day after school. We had a little small group of friends that we split once we got to high school, but we were always at each other's houses. Even I had a friend who lived with her grandparents, and they were happy and together. And my best friend, her parents, I believe they had issues when we were young, but they're still together today. And none of my friends' parents were really divorced except for one friend, but her divorce with her parents was more of the traditional divorce you see in movies, where it's like you go to the dad or mom's house every 2 weeks or every week or something like that. Whereas mine was just, my dad was no longer there, and it was just me and my mom. And so maybe because I didn't have to go back and forth, it felt okay, possibly. But
I think you had some sort of normalization too, right? You lived in the same house, you went to the same school, had the same group of friends.
Yeah.
As much as your house was a trigger, at the same time it was part of your stability, so it's a catch-22. You mentioned about your dad, and tell us a little bit about that. You now reconnected with him after not seeing him for how long, and then how was that experience?
It was about, I want to say, we reconnected this past November, and it was about 8 to 9, maybe 10 years since I had like officially seen him and spoken to him. There was a point when I was working, when I was like 16 or 17 at Walgreens, he found out I was working there and decided to come in. I didn't recognize him because it had been so long, but he wanted to see me, but I wasn't ready, and so that was a bump in the road. It kind of set him back, but I don't count that because it wasn't me actually seeing him and talking to him. But yeah, this past November with COVID, my mom and my relationship is good. There could be more of the emotional aspect of like checking in on me and stuff like that. And so I'm in an apartment. I have a roommate, but she's with her family a lot, so it's basically just me. And I wasn't in person at school, so I was very alone. The day to day was the exact same. My boyfriend right now, or even my ex-boyfriend, they both have the healthy family with the married parents. All the cousins are married. Everyone loves each other and they get along, and there's no trauma, no conflict. And it got really, really hard for me, especially during Thanksgiving. Most of the time I'm with either a friend or my boyfriend for Thanksgiving because my mom's family doesn't get together too much. But it got to me because my dad's side of the family was the family we hung out with, like I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And so that was really the only big extended family that I had. And my cousin was still hanging out with my brother, my younger brother, and my dad, and my nanny, who's my grandma, and my papa, who I haven't seen in years. It was like all of them hanging out and doing the things that I remember doing. It was like my favorite things to do with my dad, and I felt very left out. And I started to, with COVID, my nanny did get COVID, and it really put things in perspective of, I held a grudge for a really long time, but I was ready. And so I reached out, and it was a while before we actually saw each other because my nanny had COVID, so we had to wait a minute. Then it was Christmas, and everyone's schedule, like my cousin, her divorced parents, my divorced parents, seeing everyone, it was hard to find a date. But when I saw him, it's crazy because it's more of the anticipation that builds up seeing, because he walked in and the fear in my chest just went away. And I tell people this, he doesn't look like how he looked when I was a child.
Oh, right.
He had like different facial hair, but his girlfriend right now doesn't like it, so he shaves it. And so I think it's like a whole new person to me. His face is not tied to the trauma that I had or the memories that I have of him when I was younger. And so that made it like a lot easier. And 2 days ago was Father's Day, and it was very emotional. It was the first Father's Day that I had been with him in 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
And my brother was there, and
How old's your brother now?
I believe I'm turning 20. He's 15.
15, okay.
Yes. He just turned 15. Very emotional. It was a very good day. There's not much anticipation like there used to be with me. And we're gonna hang out, all of us family. We're gonna go to the river this weekend. So
Awesome. And is he's recovered then?
I believe so. So that is actually a conversation that I need to have with him. But it's the anticipation and I know it will be emotional because I apparently get my emotional side from him, which I didn't know until 2 days ago.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's something that me and my mom battle with, and now I know it's because I get it from him. But I talked to my brother about it. He's 15 now, so I do ask him, is it okay if I ask you these things, because he's older, but I don't want to force him to grow up like I had to in a way. So he's better now. He hasn't like alcohol is different than drugs, I think. I know he's not into drugs at all, but I know he does have a little bit of alcohol every now and then. But he seems like a completely different person and a new man, and I think it put him in perspective, or put perspective for him when he realized that he could lose his children over those actions. It took him a minute, but
So in life, we're often given second chances. Do you feel like this is a second chance for you to reconnect with him and give him that second chance?
yeah, definitely. I always knew that I would reconnect one day. I didn't know if it was before I got married or after I got married. Like, how would I feel if he wasn't there? He wasn't there for my high school graduation. That was my decision. And so I was like, do I want him to not be there for my college graduation? Because I'm not going to really have graduations after that.
So you talk about marriage.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to do? Understanding that, understanding your past, you've come from a significant amount of history of divorce.
Yeah.
So what, if you do want to get married, what makes you feel that way? Because I feel like you've been exposed to the complete opposite. So I'm just curious of how you feel about it.
I do want to get married. I think I've always had this need and this want to have that picture perfect family. I saw it in the movies. Like I mentioned earlier, my influence when it comes to that was more of Friends and Family, and to be honest, television. I want to have a big family. I want to get that big family that I had in the past. And I also want to give my children the life that I did not have, which I think a lot of mothers feel. I know that's how my mom felt with me and my brother. And she did succeed in making sure my life wasn't like hers growing up. But I want to give my children basically the family that my current boyfriend has. You know, the parents love each other, everyone gets along, and they talk and communicate, and they have a good time. And I've always had a plan to get married young, actually. As that gets closer, now that I'm getting older, it does scare me because my last relationship was 3.5 years long, and that was a toxic relationship. So it scares me because even if you're in a long relationship, it doesn't mean that you should be together forever, and it comes with a lot of I don't know the word, but
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And the one thing I will share with you in interviewing all these different women and understanding their story, and I am not your mother, so I don't want to lecture you, but the idea of getting young, we just don't know what we don't know. And the one thing I want to commend you for, though, is understanding what a healthy relationship is.
Yeah.
And that you are worthy of so much more. I know you spoke a little bit about it, but you came from a toxic relationship, and now it seems as though you're in a healthy relationship. Oftentimes, I know I have gone through it, the bar is so low from past relationships that women automatically cling on to any sort of existence that wasn't their ex. So I just warn you in the sense that just take your time. I mean, there's so much of life to live, especially in your 20s, that, enjoy this time and educate yourself in what is your perfect image, not only about what your marriage looks like, but how you should be treated as a woman. I think oftentimes, I was never educated on what were signs of domestic violence or what were signs of unhealthy relationships. And I think it's my mission too now is really to educate you guys that you deserve the best. You deserve everything, that you want on that wish list. And there is a gentleman out there that will be able to fulfill that. So don't settle. Just my advice.
I think I got into a relationship fairly young because of the influence that the women in my life had. A lot of them had many men in their life back to back. And so I think for me it was just like the thing that you did, you got in a relationship, and I didn't have a lot of like short ones. They were long term, and I've only had one obviously in the past. Do I regret getting in a relationship that young? Yes and no, because I wish that I had lived my life, but also I know now more of what's not a good relationship. Like I have all these examples from my family of what is not a good relationship, and then I had my own experience, and so I'm young, but I'm getting so much closer at a way earlier pace than a lot of other.
You were forced to grow up a lot faster,
Yeah.
I think, than a lot of kids your age.
Yeah.
So what are some tangible pieces of advice? One that you can, so I have daughters that I have four of them, two 11-year-olds, two 6-year-olds at this time. What's some advice that you would give them with their parents if their parents are navigating divorce?
I mean, I don't remember how young children like to communicate, but communication, this also goes for parents, just allowing or giving that space for your children to openly communicate with no judgment. That a lot of parents struggle with that without giving their feedback or their opinion.
Or speaking about their ex, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Just giving the children their own time and give them, like, when you ask them about their feelings, like, let them sit with it for a second, because they might feel it. I know my younger brother has always felt it, but he's never, even to this day, has been able to get out the words. He just breaks down and gets very emotional. So try to communicate with your parents, both of them, about how you feel about everything. If they are starting to date and you feel a certain way, I wasn't given that safe space to communicate my feelings, and so I lashed out. And my therapist tells me it was a normal way to lash out when it comes to parents dating, but you can avoid that if you share your feelings. And if you don't want to share it with your parents, or you don't have that open space, try to go to therapy. I know a lot of people think that you have to have something wrong with you to go to therapy, but just try to get those emotions out, because they will bottle up, and you either will explode, or you'll be like me and you'll push them down and have to deal with them years later. Like, I am dealing with a lot of the emotions right now towards my mother, specifically about parts of my childhood that I didn't express when I was younger, and it sucks because I don't want to have to be dealing with those right now, but I can't get rid of them. So.
Yeah. But then too, I think oftentimes children, and correct me if I'm wrong from your perspective, is they often feel like they have to take sides. So perhaps if they can't go to one parent, that they can go to a neutral party. So for instance, in your case, it seems like your grandmother was that neutral party for you, or at least an outlet for you at times, where you felt like you could trust her to have a conversation versus going directly to your mother and having that conversation. Would you agree that sometimes you as a child often carry that weight that your parents are going through?
Well, about my grandma, so she's my dad's mom. She did help, like, we did live with her. Me and my brother lived with her for a few weeks during the divorce. But I could not turn to anyone in my family, even my grandma, because she was my dad's mom.
Oh, so you did feel that she was one-sided versus the other.
Which I believe a lot of parents, especially mothers, do, no matter what. Even to this day, my grandma, like, loves her son, and so I understand. But I did not have that outlet, and there was a court-ordered therapy at one point, but that was just more to see of where we were at feeling about our parents. It wasn't like a long-term therapy at all. So I didn't have any outlet whatsoever at all.
Got it.
It was all just pushed.
And hence why you're in therapy now.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And so what advice would you give to your group, age group right now, for those young adults that have experienced some of the pain that you've gone through? What would your advice be?
Don't avoid it, which sucks, because part of the reason why I didn't talk to my dad for so long was because I was okay. I was happy. I was doing so many things in my life, and I was nervous that going back to the past would just mess all that up. It would be like this big bomb on this pretty happy life that I have. And I know my cousins can feel the same way. Like, they're even older than me, and like they're getting on with their life, and they don't want to deal with this big thing that happened in the past. So what I would say is go to therapy.
Yeah. Yep.
If you can't, it's more the communication. Try to communicate with your parents, but also try to make a good life for yourself at the same time. Learn from their mistakes, but also don't make their mistakes your life. Like, don't let that dictate your life as well, because I did struggle with that for a long time before I moved out of the house. It was like I was letting their mistakes dictate the decisions I made. And once I stopped doing that and started doing what I wanted to do and what was best for me, that's another thing. If you need to not talk to a parent for a little bit,
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's creating those safe boundaries, right? And recognizing what boundaries or what triggers you had in life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's oftentimes where we as parents, feel that the kids are going through the same emotions that we are, and we need to do a better job of separating those. So it's great advice that you're bringing to the table, is that you don't have to carry the weight that your parents have. It's your own experience, your own journey. The other thing too, I would suggest is kids sometimes, as they grow up, often use divorce almost as the victim, playing the victim. My parents got divorced, so I ended up this way.
I do that.
But I think you've done an incredible job actually of steering the other way. Yes, you probably have done that, but you now recognize, gosh, you're 20 years old. You have your entire life ahead of you. That was just one glimpse of your past. Like, I don't want you to be defined by your parents' divorce, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's the same, in the same vein, is you have to recognize all that trauma and abuse you went through, because guess what? Your body doesn't forget. Those physical reactions that you were having when you go back to the house, that's because your body was triggered by that, right? And so you as a 20-year-old being able to recognize that is such a healthy environment, that you've created this safe space where you know what your triggers are and what they aren't. So I commend you for doing that.
Yeah.
I think you are definitely on the way to healing, and then having these healthy relationships. You know what you deserve, what you should be treated like, what a good marriage is, what a good relationship is. So I very much commend you. So curious to know why that you were attracted to start working for the Graceful Exit. For those of you guys that don't know, Ivy is our social media manager, and she came to us through an internship at Chapman University, and she has been recently promoted to the management of running our social media. So you've now been with me for probably almost
6-7 months.
6-7 months, yeah. And so why were you attracted to start working for the Graceful Exit, and then how has your journey been since then?
Well, when I applied, I was applying everywhere. I had probably over 25 applications in 1 week. And you were one of the only 2 that responded. But once I had the interview and I got to really know more about it, I was like, I have to work for this company. One, it brought great opportunities to me, but it gave me an outlet for this part of me that is part of me. Like you mentioned earlier, I don't let the divorce define me, but it made me who I am. I have a lot of 100%. Wisdom for my age.
Yes.
And I come off older than I am. A lot of adults tell me that. So I treat it differently in a good way. And so because of that, I wanted to use this space to share my story, obviously, and also help other women. Your story was a lot like my aunt's, and I think my story was different because there are sometimes external factors like addiction that play into the divorce. It's more than just a unhealthy relationship too.
Yep.
And I also knew how to market to the children, because that's a big deal, as I'm very passionate about, adults, they have so much to deal with, and I would hate for parents, like, I feel like I'd just be worrying about my child so much through the divorce. But if I knew that there were resources to help me and to help them, it would help that emotional burden. And the fact that there's nothing like the Graceful Exit was bizarre to me, because I didn't know how many things, like a quadro attorney
Yes.
or lawyer, I didn't know what that was. And obviously, like, I think of a counselor and a lawyer, and that's it, like, not a financial advisor or like mediation. Like, I didn't even know you could do that. So I was proud of this company and what you created, and I'm excited to help it grow. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we are definitely proud to have you on the Graceful Exit, part of the team. I didn't realize when I hired you that this is the direction it would go, in the sense that you would be part of the story. And you have brought so much light and education to me as a parent, in navigating, from a child's lens. And I just so appreciate for your, one, transparency, vulnerability, courageousness to be able to share your story. And I know that it will impact so many others. So thank you
Yeah.
for being on today.
Thank you.
Thank you.